Tzahoraim Tovim. Good afternoon. Tzahoraim Tovim. We learned that one, everybody together. Tzahoraim Tovim. We learned that one last week, remember? And we say it so Boker Tov, Tzahoraim Tovim, and Erev Tov, and Laila Tov. Good morning. Tzahoraim Tovim. Good afternoon. Erev Tov. Good evening. Laila Tov. Good night. All right. So when you say good night, you go Laila Tov. All right. So, just a few announcements for you. First of all, good to have Irma back with us. She's up and kicking again. So good to have her back. So thank the Lord for her healing. My sister Melody was taken to emergency last night. She has a severe infection. So please be praying for her. And that's why the fam is not with us today, because Charity took her and they didn't get home until 5 o'clock this morning. So they're all crashed out. So, but anyway, so be praying for them. Pray for others who are sick among us, and pray for the Lord's healing. We will be having men's Bible study tomorrow morning at 9:30 and ladies' Bible study at noon. So you're invited to join us for that. And then please don't forget your tithes and your offerings so that we can make the rent. And we appreciate your help in all of that. All right. Genesis chapter 1 and verses 6 through 8. Genesis chapter 1, 6 through 8. It says, Vayomer Elohim yehi rakia betok hamayim vehi mavdil ben mayim lemayim. Vayas Elohim et harakia vayavdel ben hamayim asher מתחת לרקיע, אבן המים אשר מעל לרקיע, ויהי כן. ויקרא אלוהים לרקיע שמיים, ויהי ערב, ויהי בוקר יום שני. So God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, that it may separate water from water. God made the expanse, and it separated the water which was below the expanse from the water which was above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, a second day. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, we love you. We thank you for your love for us, Lord. We thank you again for your goodness in watching over us and seeing us through this week, Father, and bringing us to this place at this time to worship you and to study together. We ask, Father, that you would speak to us, touch our hearts, Father, move among us as we behold your wonders, Father, and the majesty, the greatness of your creation, Father, and all that you do. And so we ask that you would extend our trust, that you would build our faith in you because of what you have done, Father, what you are doing, and what you're going to do. And so I ask, Spirit of God, that you would breathe upon these words, and may they vibrate within our hearts, Father. May they move within us. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. So today we're going to be talking about water. Remember that water is first mentioned in verse 2, where it says that the earth is covered with the water. The Hebrew word for water is mayim. Everyone say mayim. Mayim. Now, an interesting note. We're not going to take a lot of time on it. Just an interesting note for you. Mayim is plural. Okay? So it's always, in Hebrew, it's always plural. So it would always be waters, more than one water, because water is actually a plural. It's a fluid, and so it's always plural. And so mayim. And from mayim, we have shamayim, which is heaven. Okay? So mayim is water, shamayim is heaven. So water is first mentioned in verse 2, where it says that the earth is covered with water. So always remember the law of first mention. Always remember the law of first mention. That Scripture will continue to follow the pattern that is set when it is first spoken to. So what we learn from verse 2 is that there is no land. There is no land. The earth is covered with water. The land does not appear until day 3, when Elohim, God, calls forth the land from the water. And remember that the Ruach Elohim, that the Spirit of God hovers over the water. So we find the Ruach associated with hovering and with water. We find the Ruach associated with the dove. So the surface of the earth is covered with water. And this is why the earth is called Tohu Vebohu. Remember that. Go back a couple of months. Tohu Vebohu. That it is without form and it is empty. Why? Because water has no form of its own. It takes the form of the shape. If you have your cups of coffee, your water, water has no form of its own. It has no shape of its own. It takes the shape, the form of whatever is containing it. And empty, that is, that the earth was without life. The earth is enveloped in darkness. And most of what we call life on this earth needs land and light. Most of life on the earth needs land and it needs light. There was no land, there was no light, so there was no life. Now this is the second day of creation. And Torah says concerning this second day, Vayomer, and said, Elohim, God, Yehi, there will be Rakia, an expanse, a firmament, Betok, in the midst, Hamayim, the water, Vihi, to exist, Mavdil, to divide, to separate, Bain, between, Mayim, water, Lemayim, from water. We still see this today in what is called the atmosphere. Everyone say atmosphere. This space in which we live today, this is the atmosphere, which extends from the surface of the planet all the way up to what is called the exosphere. The exosphere is over 400 miles above the planet, the surface of the earth. And so we live in this atmosphere. And this atmosphere is called Rakia. Say Rakia. Rakia is the expanse or a firmament. So what God did is he took part of the water off of the face of the earth and he lifts it up so that part of the water is above the earth and part of the water is on the earth. Part of the water, he takes the water that's on the earth, the entire globe is covered with water. He takes the water and he divides it. And he lifts up part of the water and he leaves part of the water on the surface. Everybody able to picture that somewhat? All right, you're going to hear some really cool stuff. Okay? You're going to hear some really cool stuff today. Rashi says, concerning this verse, let the expansion become fixed. For although the heavens were created on the first day, they were still in fluid form. They were liquid. They were still in fluid form. They became solidified only on the second day. Now, it's important. Listen to the terms that he's using, that they're liquid and then they become solid. They become solidified. On the second day, at the dread command, literally a rebuke of the Holy One, blessed be he, when he said, let the firmament be stable. This is in Genesis Rabbah 4 and 2. It is to this that allusion is made in what is written in Job 26:11. The pillars of heaven were trembling. They were unstable. This was during the whole of the first day. And on the second day, Job 26:11, they were astonished at his rebuke, like a man who stands immovable, amazed at the rebuke of one who terrifies him. What is he saying? That God, when he separates the water, The water doesn't want to stay. The water doesn't want to stay. Why would the water not want to stay? Gravity. How can it just hang up there? It doesn't want to stay. It's wanting to fall down. And so the way the tone of the Hebrew is that of a rebuke. That God rebukes the water for not wanting to stay in its place. That what is holding it up is trembling, is shaking. And so this is what Job is referring to in Job 26:11, that the pillars of heaven were trembling to hold the water up. And so God rebukes it to stay there, to stay in place. So Rashi tells us that part of the water was lifted up and it solidifies there. It's a liquid, it goes up, it's a liquid, and then it becomes solid, not fluid. In its normal form, here on earth, water is fluid, a liquid. It can also take on a gaseous state, steam. It can also take on a solid state, ice. So Rashi says the water became solidified. And that is the root of the word firmament. Many translations say firmament. To be firm. Firm is the root of firmament. So it is firmed up. Now the study of words is called etymology. Everyone say etymology. I love etymology. That's one of my passions. I do this all the time. English, Hebrew, Greek, Spanish, German. I like looking for the root of things, for the root of words. So it's called etymology. The etymology of this word firmament is literally a support, a strengthening, from the Latin word firmus. Everyone say firmus, which means strong, to be strengthened. So the Hebrew word here is rakia. The definition of rakia, listen, is an extended solid surface. Rakia is an extended. So this is rakia. It's an extended solid surface. But the key is to solidify, to be solid. It's the idea, this word rakia, is the idea of a vault, of an archway. What does an archway do? An archway creates space in something that is solid. How does it create space? It's holding up, the archway is holding up something heavy over the space to create the space. So the doorway, you have the lintel going over the door that holds up the building so it doesn't collapse into that empty space. That is rakia. Many ancient Arabic, Greek, and Roman structures utilize this means of construction to be able to have an open space without the need of much support. Think of the archways in the old Roman and Greco-Roman buildings. Think of the archways in the cathedrals and buildings like that. And so the mosques, the Arabians are famous for their archways, for their arched buildings. And so so the Arabic and Greek and Roman structures utilize this means of construction to be able to have an open space without the need of much support. Some of the most well-known arches in the world are the Roman aqueducts, how they flow down from the mountain down to the lower levels of land, and how they up on the top, it's solid all the way from the mountain all the way down to the lower land. But on the bottom, there are arches all the way down so that they don't have to use as much material. The archways in massive stone walls surrounding the cities, the basilicas, the dome ceilings in mosques and cathedrals. This is all the word rakia. And what holds up all of the weight carried by the arch in the basilica, in the dome ceiling, in the archway in the wall, what's holding up all of that weight? Pressure. You have the archway. You have the pillar on each side. The arch is then built on the pillar. And right in the middle is what is called the keystone. And the keystone has a particular angle on each side. It's a little bit flat here. It gets wider at the top. It's angled. And it slips in. They slip the keystone in between the two sides. And the pressure pushing on this side, the pressure pushing on that side holds that keystone in place, and that holds the whole thing together. And so what holds it all up is pressure. Notice that Rashi quotes Job 26, verses 10 and 11, speaking of creation. He says, Job 26, 10 and 11 says, He marks out the horizon on the face of the waters for a boundary between light and dark. The pillars of heaven tremble, astounded at His rebuke. The pillars are the support of the arch. The arch is built on pillars, and they're trembling, and God rebukes them. Rashi is stating that it is as if the water does not want to behave, and God rebukes the firmament, as Job says, that it is astounded at God's rebuke. Again, the term, as we talked about last week, the term, let there be, yechi, let there be, is gentle in comparison to what it literally is saying. There will be. There will be. And so it's not let there be a firmament, it is there will be a firmament. So the tendency of the water is to come crashing back down to earth. And God commands the water to behave, to do what He has commanded it to do. And this is why we find Yeshua does the same thing. What does He do? He commands the water to behave. Mark chapter 4, verse 37 to 41. A great windstorm arose, and the waves were rushing into the boat. The boat was beginning to fill up, but Yeshua was in the back of the boat, sleeping on a pillow. They wake Him up and say to Him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? So He woke up and He rebuked the wind, the very same words that Rashi uses for God creating. He rebukes the wind. And He said to the sea, Quiet, be still. Then the wind stopped, and it became totally calm. And He said to them, Why are you afraid? Even now you have no faith? And they were struck with awe and said to one another, Who is this? Even the wind and the sea obey His voice. Because it is the voice, the same voice that on the second day of creation told the water, behave. It's the same God, the same Creator. So here again we find the water misbehaving and being rebuked. And so again we see a pattern being established and followed all the way through. And understand that God set the boundary for the water. He sets the boundary. The water above, it cannot leave that boundary. The water below, it cannot leave that boundary. The reason why the Gulf of Mexico stays where it is because God set its boundary and it cannot go any further. You hear what I'm saying? The reason why the Atlantic Ocean is where it is because God set the boundary and it cannot go any further. The Pacific, the Indian, the Arabian, all of the Mediterranean, all of the oceans, all of the seas, all of the Great Lakes, they are set within a zone, within a boundary, and they cannot escape. They cannot overrun the place where God has put them. The reason why they are where they are and they stay there is because God has set a boundary for them when he calls forth the land. Proverbs chapter 8, verses 26 through 29, he had not yet made the land, the fields, or the first dust of the earth. When he set the heavens in place, I was there. When he inscribed the horizon on the face of the ocean, when he established the skies above, when he securely fixed the fountains of the deep, when he set the boundary for the sea, he set the boundary for the sea so that the waters never transgress his command, when he laid out earth's foundation. Now we're going to learn about a lot of these things from Proverbs chapter 28. He establishes the sky. He fixes the fountains of the deep. He sets the boundaries for the seas so that the waters cannot transgress. He laid out the earth's foundation. Jeremiah chapter 5 verses 21 and 22 says, "Hear this, you foolish people, who have no understanding, who have eyes but do not see, who have ears but do not hear. Do you not fear me, says Adonai? Do you not tremble in my presence? For I made the sand a boundary of the sea, an everlasting decree that cannot be broken. Though the waves roll, they cannot prevail. Though they roar, they cannot go across it." Understand that all of this will come into play in the story of Noah and the great flood. There are people, scientists, who question whether or not there was ever a great worldwide flood. They doubt that such a thing would happen, that it could happen. They ask, where's all the water? You've heard them. You've read it. They ask, where's all the water necessary for such a thing to happen? So they determined that it was just a local event, a major one, but only in one local area. One of the failures of their reasoning is that they assume that the earth past is the same as the earth present. That the earth back then was the same as the earth which we see today. That the conditions that exist now are the same conditions that existed then. There is more water on the face of the earth now than there was back then. There was a greater landmass back then than there is now. Why? Because the earth was created as a water world. And part of that water that was on the earth was placed in the atmosphere over the earth. And this will make room, remember that term, go all the way back to the beginning, Tzimtzum, everyone say Tzimtzum, to make room. God makes room for creation. The earth makes room. The water makes room for land. The mother will make room for the child, Tzimtzum. And so And so God will remove part of the water and put it in the atmosphere over the earth, and this will make room for land to appear. And all of that water will come crashing back down to the earth in the Great Flood. You think about it. Do you know that geologists who study these things, even those who do not believe in the creation story and those who do not believe in God, do you know that geologists do admit that this earth at one time was covered with water? They do. Because all the evidence is there. And so all of the water that God has holding up in the atmosphere will come crashing back down to earth during the flood event. And this is how it will rain for 40 days and 40 nights. That's how long it takes for that water to fall back down to earth. And then as well, it says that the fountains of the deep break up. We will talk about that. Do you know that scientists have recently, and I mean recently, within this last year, have recently discovered that there is sufficient water on this planet to cover the face of the earth? There is enough water on this planet that it could cover the face of the earth, even as the flood describes. The scriptures describe the flood. And many news organizations have reported on this just recently, within the last couple of months. You can check it out. It has been found that within the earth's mantle, which is from the surface down to between 250, 450 miles beneath the surface, there is a great ocean of water. Do you know that the continents are not sitting on solid? They literally float on water. And so just recently, I read it, and it's there. You can go check it out. Google it. They just reported, just this last month, in the last couple of months, that they have discovered this great ocean of water that is within the mantle. If this water, this is what the report said, if this water were brought to the surface, it would literally flood the entire surface of the planet. I'm telling you, there is enough water on this earth to do what the Bible says it did during the flood. Rashi goes on to explain that in the midst of the water, the Hebrew betok, literally in the middle, is stating to us that half of the water was lifted to the heights, while the rest of the water, the other half, remained on the face of the planet. So it's not just a little bit of water. He takes half of the water off of the planet and puts it up in the sky and hangs it, suspends it up in the air, and then he leaves the other half. He explains to us that the upper waters are suspended at the same distance, at equidistance, all around the planet, saying it's not a belt of water where there's less here and more there. The distance between the upper waters and the lower waters is the same distance everywhere, because the Hebrew language is that of a canopy of water over the entire globe. So the globe, what God has made it, if you can picture this, is a sphere within a sphere. The sphere of the earth within this sphere, atmosphere, this sphere of water. Very good. The snow globe is exactly what it is. And it was God himself who held this canopy, this firmament, this water, in its solid state, in place. Rashi explains that the water above are suspended, held in place, by, he says, the king. Job chapter 38, verses 34 through 38. Can you raise your voice to the clouds and cover yourself with abundance of water? Can you send out lightning bolts so they go? Will they say to you, here we are? Who put wisdom in the secret place or gave understanding to the mind? Who can count the clouds by wisdom or tip over the water jars of heaven when dust hardens into a mass and clouds of earth stick together? He's telling us who the Creator is and who it is that holds everything in place. Psalm chapter 135, verses 6 and 7. Whatever Adonai pleases, he does in heaven and in earth, in the seas and in all the deeps. He makes clouds rise from the end of the earth. He makes lightning for the rain. He brings wind out of his storehouses. In Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3 says, and he is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power. Speaking of Yeshua, he upholds all things. Colossians chapter 1, verse 17 says, he is before all things. Talking again, speaking of Yeshua, he is before all things. In him all things hold together. Ibn Ezra, who was a rabbi from the 16th century, Ibn Ezra says concerning all of this, the correct interpretation of firmament, rakia, is something spread out. And they did beat vayirakheu, the gold, into thin plates. Exodus 39:3. So he's referring to when they're making the Ark of the Covenant and they beat the gold into thin plates. Now, why is he referring to that? Because of the word rakia. When it says that they beat the gold, it says yirakeu. Do you hear the similarity? Because yirakeu comes from rakia. What is he saying? 2 Samuel chapter 22 and verse 43 says, then I did beat them, and he spread them out as a tent to dwell. What's all this? What are they talking about? So, rakia is from the root of the word erkaem. Everyone say erkaem, which means to beat. It is hammered out. To beat with an anvil and a hammer. What you do with metal. You beat it out. So he says, Ibn Ezra is stating that the water is being expanded. That is, it is being stretched out. Much like metal, such as gold being beaten. What happens? You start off with a bar of gold. Imagine you start off with a bar of gold and you begin to hammer on it. What happens when you hammer on it? It gets shorter this way, but it begins to spread out. Because it does not lose its mass. So something has to happen. So as you're pushing it down this way, it's going this way. And that's what is being described with this atmosphere. It is being hammered down and stretched out like a canopy around the earth. And so he says the waters are above are stretched out like a canopy, like one who is putting up a tent. The roof of the tent is stretched out over the base or the bottom of the tent. Isaiah chapter 40, verses 21 and 22. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundation of the earth? He sits above the circle. By the way, no flat earth. There is no flat earth. The Bible tells you that the earth is a sphere. He sits above the circle of the earth. Its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. Listen, he stretches out the sky like a curtain. He spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. Ibn Ezra goes on to say, how precious are the words of he who said that the firmament begins at the point where the sun and the ocean merge. What is that point called? The horizon. The firmament is the air, because when the light shone very strongly upon the earth and a wind dried off the earth. Now listen to what he's saying, because we're going to come back to this. The firmament is the air, because when the light shone very strongly upon the earth and a wind dried off from the earth, the flame turned into firmament. Similarly, the psalmist states, Psalm 104, verses 2 and 3, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, who lays the beam of your upper chambers in the water. Understand that there is scientific reasoning. There's scientific purpose in this, which we'll look at in a moment. Saying these are proved by modern scientific evidence. What is described in the creation, what Ibn Ezra describes, what Rashi describes, what these people are describing, there is modern scientific evidence for this. Keeping in mind, please, and this is why I'm quoting them to you, not to bore you, but for you to understand that these men lived between 500 and 2,000 years ago. And they are describing what has only been discovered, what has only recently been discovered. Through science. By what evidence do they say these things? As we have pointed out on several occasions through these teachings, these men living before the modern scientific era, in which many of the things of our understanding of how this world and this universe works, there was none of that. But the Jewish sages, using the Torah, are able to deduce these things. Think about it. They did not have satellites back then. They didn't have computers. They didn't have microscopes. They had none of these things. Yet they have such knowledge and understanding of how creation works. Ibn Ezra continues, the psalmist then makes mention of the clouds and the wind and the establishment of the earth. The latter is above the water. We thus read, for he hath founded it, the earth, upon the sea. Psalm 24:2. And to him that spreads forth the earth above the water. Psalm 136:6. Similarly, whoever goes to the ocean is said to be going down. Do we not say we're going down to the island? My mom's family grew up in Philadelphia, and they would go every summer. They would go and spend a week in New Jersey, Ocean City, New Jersey, and they would say they were going down to the shore. Down to the shore. Here we say we're going down to the island. Why? Because it is geographically down, sea level. The meaning of he that calleth for the waters of the sea and poureth them out upon the face of the earth, Amos 5:8, is that God commands the water of the sea to give birth to clouds, and afterward, and he pours them out upon the face of the earth. The Ramban Nachmanides says it is possible that this is what the rabbis intended by their saying in Bereshit Rabbah 4:1. Rav said the heavens were in fluid form on the first day, and on the second day they were solidified. Now remember, he's living some 1,000 years ago. And he's talking about this scientific concept. He says that the heavens were in fluid form on the first day, and on the second day they were solidified. Rav thus said, let there be a firmament means let the firmament become strong. Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Shimon, said, let the firmament become like a plate, just as you say in the verse, and they did beat. Vayereku contains the same root as rakia, firmament, the gold into thin plates. So he's saying that the rakia, that the firmament was beaten into place. It was hammered into place, as it were. Now remember, the Rambam is writing from the 13th century, some 1,100 years ago. And he's quoting from the Chasal, the sages, who were living in the Second Temple period some 2,000 years ago. So you have a man who's living 1,100 years ago, quoting people who were living 2,000 years ago, saying that this atmosphere is hammered into place like metal. The Rambam, quoting Rav Yehuda, says, Yehi, let there be, rochia, a firmament, yechasek, yechasek, say chasek, to be strengthened. Yechasek comes from the word chasak. Chasak. You'll remember the story of Yehoshua, of Joshua. What is the theme at the beginning of the story of Yehoshua? Chasak. Hashem speaking to Yehoshua, Joshua chapter 1, verses 5 and 6 says, no one will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Chasak, be strong. Verse 9, have not I commanded you? Chasak, be strong. Do not be terrified or dismayed. Adonai your God is with you wherever you go. And then at the end of the chapter, the people say to Yehoshua, verse 18, whoever rebels against your command and does not obey your words in all that you command them, he will be put to death. Only chasak, be strong and courageous. So Rav Yehuda says that God commands the firmament, yechasek, be strengthened. So we find out that there is an equal distribution with an even separation surrounding the entire globe that is stretched out and that is hardened and strengthened. The idea of this hardening and this strengthening is like what is called malleable metal. You have metal, you have some things that are not malleable. Malleable means that it can be beaten without being broken. So iron is not malleable. Iron, when it is beaten, will break. Stainless steel, however, is malleable. Dirt is not malleable. You have a clod, you beat it with a hammer, it breaks. Gold, however, is malleable. When you beat it, it does not break. So the idea of this hardening or strengthening is like a malleable metal, like gold beaten into thin plates. So this water above is hardened and flattened like a bar of gold can be beaten or pressed into a flat plate. This is as a goldsmith can take a piece of gold and hammer it, or with great pressure, press the gold into specific form or shape. As the pressure, the hammering, or the pressing is exerted upon the gold, as it becomes thinner, it also expands like a ball of dough on a tortilla press. Think about it. You take a ball of dough, you put it into a tortilla press, you put pressure on it. What happens? It expands. It becomes flat, but it expands. That's what was happening above the earth. Saying that the waters above are placed, how are they held into place? Like the keystone of an archway. They are held in place by pressure. And this pressure flattens it and it expands it out so that these waters cover the entire surface of the planet. Like a snow globe, a sphere within a sphere. So there's the globe, the earth within a sphere, much like a snow globe that one would shake to make a winter scene. The sphere is suspended above the earth's surface by, listen to me, by divine proclamation. The word of God. So we go from the Chazal. Are you ready? We go from the Chazal, the sages, to scientific evidence. And this brings us to a question which is answered in the scientific evidence. Why did God do all of this? What was the purpose of this? What's the reason for this? Why does God divide the waters, removing half of the water, placing it above, leaving half of the water below? And why is this? Why does he stretch this water out like a canopy? That the water is hardened and flattened out. The reason that God does this is he creates a shield around the earth. He creates a shield around the planet. Kind of like on Star Trek, right? When Captain, what's his name? Captain Kirk tells them to put up the shields. And so they put up the shields, and so when rockets and whatever are shot at the spacecraft, what happens? They just bounce off. That's what God does to the planet. He puts a shield around the planet. There's a famous Jewish historian who lived at the time of the destruction of the temple by the name of Josephus. He wrote a work called The History of the Jews so that the Romans would understand the people who were revolting under the Roman oppression. Concerning the story of creation, Josephus writes that the firmament, this expanse of water, this rakia, was made of crystals. Now, mind you, this is a man living 2,000 years ago. He lived approximately the same time as Yeshua, and he's telling the Romans that when God created this sphere, when God called this sphere out, that it consisted of crystals. Remember that water forms crystals when frozen. Ice crystals. Water. What is water? Water is a molecular compound. It is a molecular atomic compound made of hydrogen and oxygen. So this is important. This is important. Made of hydrogen and oxygen. Literally made of 2 hydrogen atoms to 1 oxygen atom. In modern scientific experiments, some surprising discoveries have been made. Just this past year, it was discovered that when under extremely cold conditions and intense pressure, hydrogen does, in fact, crystallize. How did Josephus know this? He's living 2,000 years ago. He cannot see the atomic structure. And yet he told them it crystallizes, that it crystallized. Hydrogen does, in fact, crystallize. And when it crystallizes, the oxygen turns blue. The atom for oxygen will turn blue. Under pressure and extreme cold, the hydrogen is what crystallizes, and then the oxygen atom turns blue. And rakia means to be under pressure. While under this intense pressure, two things happen to hydrogen. Hear me. While under intense pressure, two things happen to hydrogen. Number one, it becomes clear. Remember, the oxygen becomes blue. So this is one of the reasons why the water looks blue, why the sky looks blue, because oxygen turns blue. Hydrogen becomes clear, but it becomes like metal. It becomes metallic. Are you hearing what I'm saying? It becomes like metal. It also becomes superconductive, meaning that there's a strong electrical current flowing through it. This is a magnetic field that is so strong that it becomes very difficult to separate the molecules. What are we saying? How does the water stay up? It is under extreme pressure. Under this extreme pressure, it becomes crystallized and it becomes superconductive. An electric current flows through it, and that increases the connectivity of the atomic molecules together so that it becomes very difficult to break them. This is the magnetic field. This magnetic field becomes so strong that it becomes difficult to separate the molecules. And the Earth just so happens to have a very powerful magnetic field. This pressurized, superconducting, metallic-like, clear shield would be self-sustaining. It holds its position above the Earth. As well, when hydrogen is excited by energy, there's an electric field flowing through it. Hydrogen begins to glow pink. When the pink of the hydrogen is mixed with the blue of the oxygen, it glows blue-pink. There's a color word, there's a word for that, a name for that. When you mix pink and blue together, you come up with a color called magenta. How many of you have heard of magenta? It's a purplish pink color. It's the color you see at sunrise and sunset. Do you know that God is giving you a taste of what the original creation was at sunset? When you see a beautiful sunset with all the pinks and blues and purples in the sky, how does that make you feel? Don't you want to just stop and take it in? One day I was driving down the expressway and I saw it was a winter day like we've been having lately, and I was driving just as it going up to head towards McAllen, that little curve there, and I was driving and going up above the mall, and I looked out and oh, the colors were so fantastic, spectacular. I felt that God had made that just for me. When you see a sunrise and a sunset, you are seeing God is giving you a taste of what the earth was like during creation. That's the truth. the way that magenta is created, it's called extraspectral, meaning that it cannot be created by a single light wave. So solid color like red, the primary colors, those are single light lengths. Magenta is a combination of red and blue. And that's the only way you can see it. You must have two. Thus it is created by light flowing through the oxygen and the hydrogen of the water in the firmament. And since there are twice as many hydrogen atoms as oxygen, the pink is a deeper pink. And as it turns out, magenta is the favorite color of growing plant life. Did you know that? Plants love magenta. In a recent article in a magazine called Science Notes entitled Making Greenhouses Greener by Making Them Magenta, the University of California, Santa Cruz Arboretum and Botanic Gardens utilize magenta light in its greenhouse. The window panes, even the windows, are magenta. Why? Because plants absorb the red and the blue waves of light for photosynthesis to produce chlorophyll. This is how plants grow. The reason why you see the plant as green is because it's rejecting the green wavelength. So the green is bouncing off of the plant, so you see the green. So when you're looking around at the colors, it's because whatever that color is, the object is rejecting that wavelength and it's bouncing off of that wavelength. So the plant is rejecting the green wavelength but is taking in the red and the blue wavelengths, i.e. magenta. So the more magenta light, the more chlorophyll. And the more chlorophyll, the more vegetation. And the more vegetation, the more fruit is produced. In its pre-flood state, the entire earth was a veritable garden producing fruit in abundance for animals and humans alike. It was a jungle out there. And it covered the earth. Because the sphere covered the earth, producing magenta, which the plant life is gobbling up like you gobble up cookies and turning it into chlorophyll and producing fruit. Another feature of this hydrogen-oxygen shield was protection from solar radiation. Today, the sun is deadly to most living things. We receive today a much higher concentration of shortwave radiation from the sun than did our pre-flood ancestors. And sunlight-induced skin cancer is one of the greatest killers on earth today. This is why, particularly in the summer, we are incessantly warned to use sunscreen and to cover up. Sunscreen works to filter out the shortwave radiation emitted by the sunlight. Do you know that there are some 60 known diseases that are caused in human beings by this radiation? This is one of the reasons that humans have had a much longer lifespan before the flood. They lived hundreds of years. Adam lived over 700 years. Methuselah lived to be nearly 1,000 years old. How could they live so long? because the sun was not poisoning them. Because God had created a shield that covered the entire globe. Another unexpected result of the color magenta. Watch this. Did you know that magenta, do you know that colors have effect on you psychologically? Do you know that green makes you hungry? Green makes you hungry. Do you know that red can be used to make you angry? Do you know what pink does? Pink is a mood booster. Magenta is a mood booster. Magenta is known to decrease depression and is associated with creativity and happier moods. Magenta increases motivation and improves performance on time-sensitive tasks. Several years ago, the Los Angeles criminal justice system implemented a study in which certain sections of the prison were painted in magenta. The result was that it had a calming effect on recalcitrant prisoners. Prisoners were wanting to fight and get into it and all of these things, and they would put them in the pink ward. The reason is that the color magenta is sent to the thalamus, the center of your brain, which is the part of the brain responsible for hormonal secretion, and dopamine is produced. And dopamine is responsible for our feelings of pleasure, of memory, and of motivation. So they put them in magenta-colored lockups. And their brains automatically produce dopamine. And dopamine is the feel-good drug. And so they start relaxing. Now, the sky would not be magenta. It would be slightly pink. But this pink glow would become even more pronounced and into magentas at sunrise and sunset, even as it does today. The sunrises and sunsets of that time would have been even more spectacular than we can see today. It's the same color we see in the sky at sunrise and sunset, only much more spectacular and beautiful. Another effect that the sphere of hydrogen and oxygen would have upon the earth is higher atmospheric pressure. Higher atmospheric pressure. Today, the atmosphere extends approximately 200 miles above the surface of the planet. With the sphere of water in place, that boundary would be much lower. The air would be more compressed between the sphere and the planet, and this would have created a higher oxygen concentration in the air being breathed. More oxygen. In fact, this practice of pressurizing oxygen is a known and much practiced medical remedy today. In many medical situations, the patient is placed on pure high-pressure oxygen. I was on that when I was sick. One may be placed in a hyperbaric chamber in which the chamber is filled with pressurized oxygen, and amazing things happen. For example, do you know that wound recovery is cut in half so that a wound recovery that would normally take 7 days is cut to 3 to 3.5 days? In a study done by Texas A&M University, hyperbaric treatment was shown to have the ability to cure chronic fatigue syndrome, to remove migraine headaches in less than an hour. Many other maladies are quickly cured by this process. This pressurized atmosphere also solves the problem of how certain creatures who cannot fly in our present atmosphere could fly then. Have you ever wondered, why did God give wings to that thing? Because they can't fly the way our atmosphere is. But under an increasingly pressurized atmosphere, they could fly. So birds like the pterodactyl, the dinosaurs with wings, even birds like penguins, would be able to fly. Because it would take much less effort for them to take off. It takes much greater effort. This is why you see some birds running along to take off. This is why the birds that take off easily have what? The great wingspans. They can just begin to soar. But the birds that are shorter have shorter wingspans. They have to hop and jump a little bit. They have to take off running. Some birds you see running along the water. Why? They're trying to get the wind built up under their air, the pressure built up under their wing. The way a wing works is that it creates high pressure under the wing, low pressure above the wing, so that it is lifted up. But in order to do that, just like an airplane, they have to take off running. But the pressurized atmosphere and hyperoxygenation of the air would cause them to better digest their food and to utilize energy. And guess what? Mosquitoes would not have to bite you, because at that pressurized rate, they could literally feed off of the oxygen right there in the air. They would receive the oxygen straight. That's why they did mosquitoes bite back then? No. Now, one final piece of evidence for you, and we close. This shield was strong enough. Remember, it is metallic now. Under pressure, hydrogen becomes like metal. Strong enough to bounce asteroids off of it. It was a sphere, a balloon of protection, keeping dangers from asteroids to radiation, from penetrating the atmosphere and doing damage to the planet and its inhabitants. This is how much God cares for his creation. There are those who say, well, existentialists, that God just created things. He just threw the planet out there and just said, well, let's see what happens. No. This is what it means that he has you in the palm of his hand. But due to its composition, watch. This is the coolest thing. Due to its composition, its metallic-like nature, it also vibrated like a bell. It vibrated like a bell. You see, every star, every planet, every galaxy, and even the universe itself vibrates. And each entity vibrates at its own peculiar frequency. And each of these vibrations oscillates, meaning that the vibrations can vary slightly. We know that today the universal vibration, the vibration of the universe itself, is at the frequency of 432 hertz. 432 hertz. And it can vary anywhere from 10 to 15 hertz to one side to 10 to 15 hertz on the other, but the constant is 432 hertz. That means that it is producing 432 waves per second. 432 waves of sound per second. Now imagine that those 432 waves per second are hitting the metallic-like sphere that surrounds the Earth. That sphere will begin to vibrate at the same frequency, producing a hum. Because what is sound? Sound is frequency in waves. The reason why you hear it is because your eardrum is vibrating at that same frequency, and it sends a signal to your brain as sound. That's how you hear. So this giant bell, this sphere, is vibrating in harmony with the entire universe, reacting to the waves that are hitting it, saying there would be a soft, continuous hum coming through the atmosphere down to the surface of the planet. But as well, every planet and every star is also oscillating at its own frequency. And all these waves are also hitting the sphere and being projected down to the surface, saying the entire universe is one big, giant orchestra. It is. Saying that the universe is one giant music maker. Because all of these waves, although they are at different frequency, watch this, because only God can do this, all of the waves, even though they are operating at different frequencies, are harmonious to the human ear. They oscillate in harmony with one another. So when they are converted, so that the human ear can hear them, which is the sound, simply the sound waves hitting the eardrum, which vibrates, sending impulses to the brain, they harmonize literally like a section of string instruments. That's the sound. It sounds like an orchestra. And the music is never the same 2 days in a row. It is always in harmony, but it always changes, but always in harmony. So you never hear the same song 2 days in a row. And it is something. It has been demonstrated that this orchestration brings about a relaxation to the listener. This is literally what they mean when they say to be in tune with the universe, to be at one with the universe. They don't take these things because the universe is vibrating with music. It is a vibrant, living universe, singing its praises to God the Creator. We're going to get into this in a few weeks when we study the creation of the stars. Every star has its angel, and every angel has its star. So when the psalmist speaks of the heavenly hosts, is he speaking of the stars? Yes. Is he speaking of the angels? Yes. They're together. Every star has its angel. Every angel has its star. And together they make. Remember that there is a group of angels who are musical. And every day they're singing their praises to God. And so this sphere surrounding the planet is like a giant radio receiver, picking up these harmonious waves from the universe and softly transmitting them down to the surface of the planet. And everything on the surface picks up the vibration. Can you imagine living in a pine forest and the needles on the tree are vibrating with the frequencies of the universe? Everything is broadcasting this music. God created the first surround sound music system. Literally. You're surrounded by music 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The angels never stop singing their praises to God. The stars never cease their oscillations before the dawn. Broadcasting to us beautiful music. And you can find this on the internet. It's there. NASA produces videos of the sounds. There's one man who, a believer, a presentator, who took the sounds of the universe and he put them alongside of orca whales and different creatures. And he manipulates them some, but they begin to sing How Great Is Our God together. You can Google it, it's on YouTube. It's a beautiful video. Can you imagine the first human beings awaking to the sound of a gentle orchestra and the sight of a spectacular sunrise of the hues of magenta and pink and purple? More spectacular than we can see or imagine today. And with sunsets just as spectacular, also sent to the music of the universe. Living in a lush garden, in the midst of a beautiful woods, surrounded by sights and smells of freshness, the air perfumed by flowers and fruits that don't even any longer exist, we don't even know today. Oxygenated, taking in deep breaths of sweet air. All of these are only examples of what life was like on this planet under the condition in which it was originally created. We go somewhere today. We see a beautiful sunrise or a beautiful sunset. We see a majestic waterfall. We walk through the woods. We smell fresh air. And we think how wonderful this creation is. We don't even know the half of it. If we think that this is beautiful, 10,000 times more beautiful was the original creation. But do you want to know what's cool? He's going to put everything back the way it was. In the world to come. That's the way it's going to be. Except you won't be able to fall again. The ability to fall into sin will be removed from you, and it won't ever happen again. And we will live as God created us to live and as He intended us to live in this good planet that He created for us. It's not just about streets of gold. and gates of pearl. He's going to restore the Garden of Eden. It's called paradise. Part is the garden. And he's going to put it all back the way it was, never to fall again. Our Father, our King, we long for that day. We long, Father, to see such a world, to experience such an existence, singularity of purpose, to serve the Creator with all of our hearts, with all of our mind, with all of our soul, with all of our strength, as you intended. And our Father, we cannot wait to see the face of the one who loves us, the one who gave his life for us, the one who's coming back to restore all things. We long for that day. Help us today to be faithful and true and strong, because there is a tomorrow coming. And we want to see that tomorrow. We want to be a part of your kingdom. So help us in our faults and our failures, and lift us up and strengthen us, even as you strengthened the rakia above the earth. Strengthen us and fill us with music. And may the colors of life shine forth through us. Help us, we pray. In the name of Yeshua, our Savior and our Messiah. And all God's people said, let's all stand.